Good morning and welcome to today's FS Club webinar, Banking on AI, where we'll be dissecting GFT's latest Banking Disruption Index, a quarterly assessment of consumer attitudes towards digital transformation, which focuses on the innovation led by AI and how it's affecting the experience of the modern banking customer. It is my pleasure to introduce Richard Callis, Customer Solutions Director at GFT. Richard assists retail banking clients in addressing their strategic and operational challenges in the new digital economy with truly innovative solutions and services. Before GFT, he was a solutions architect with MENA, having held similar roles at Ubicum and Temenos, leading solutions for organisations such as Metrobank, JPMC, UBS and the Bank of England. We're also fortunate to have Simon Thompson with us today. Simon is Head of AI, Machine Learning and Data Science at GFT in the UK and brings nearly 30 years experience of using machine learning to create value for customers. His team delivers a systematic and scientific approach to AI, drawing on GFT's comprehensive and deep knowledge of financial services as an industry. Simon provides technical leadership in the projects he conducts and has led and coordinated large teams in highly stressful situations to successful outcomes. So hopefully this morning isn't too stressful for you, Simon. So GFT is a digital transformation leader with a passion for technology and innovation and is therefore very well placed to be a valuable contributor and member of the FS Club community. If we haven't met yet virtually or in person, I'm Charlotte Brashley and I manage the FS Club here at CN. And I'd like to warmly acknowledge our very generous sponsors, including the fantastic GFT, who enable us to continue to bring a wide range of thought-provoking content across finance, technology and economics to you. This session will be recorded and available to watch on our website within 48 hours. We'll also be holding a 20-minute Q&A session after the presentation. So please use the GoToWebinar chat facility to send your questions in to me early, and then I can feed them into the conversation with Richard and Simon. We'll also be having a very interactive session today, so do stay awake so you can get involved and answer the poll questions. Now, without any further ado, the floor is yours, Richard.
Thanks, Charlotte. It's a pleasure to be here. And So if I start by setting some context around GFT. So GFT is an engineering technology consulting organization. We're based out of 15 geographies around the world. Obviously, we operate wider than that with a large and diverse client base. We specialize in cloud engineering, cloud enablement, data science, app engineering, and more AI focused solutions for our clients globally. And we primarily focus on financial services. However, we do operate in a number of other market sectors as well. And so we started looking at the market to understand what our clients would need, but more importantly, what their customers would need. And last year, we realized that actually in the market, there was no research or analysis that understood what our clients' customers really thought of them in a technology and digital sense. There were customer and consumer sentiment analysis around what consumers felt towards banks, banking services, but there was nothing that focused on how well consumers thought in a digitally savvy world their banks were actually applying the technology that was available to them for consumers' benefits. So last year we launched the GFT Banking Disruption Index, which is a survey across 2,000 responders across a various different demographic in the UK. The Banking Disruption Index has now gone on to expand into multiple geographies around the world, and we're looking forward to see that growth expand and see the results that actually reaps for us. So in our initial research, we started understanding a baseline of consumer sentiment around the digital services that their banks actually offered to them. We also wanted to understand what level of trust that customers had in the banks and the banking services and the technology that they were using. And our initial research showed that 48% of customers don't actually trust their banks, which was quite interesting, especially when we start moving into economic circumstances like recession and with the cost of living crisis, etc. We also wanted to understand how customers wanted to interact with their banks. You hear an awful lot about customer dissatisfaction at the high street banks closing their branches, and customers actually relishing that face-to-face. We found actually in that first survey that around 67% would actually prefer to use an app on their mobile phone for their everyday banking use. And when we actually realistically got down into the purposes for using the branch and that face-to-face, it actually did dwindle, and no surprise, it was an older demographic that preferred that face-to-face interaction. We took that forward in the second BDI, where we wanted to understand how consumers felt their banks were helping them, especially during a cost of living crisis, and how they felt when they were using those banking apps and banking services. And around 77% actually expressed a feeling of nervousness or anxiety when actually opening their mobile app and receiving the balance, which showed a level of uncertainty around their financial well-being, their spending. That helps us advise banks on the services that they should offer. So in particular, if banks such as Monzo, Starling, Revolut, etc., even though Revolut not being a bank, but they adhere to principles where they apply push notification services. So leveraging modern communications to advise customers when money is received into their account and leaves their account. And we found that amongst customers of those neobanks, that level of anxiety dropped substantially because they were always aware of what their balance was and their spending was. And then in the third index, we took that challenge between the traditional banks and neobanks one step further and started looking at international spending and whether consumers were aware of the charges and fees that their banks were applying when they were spending and accessing their money overseas. And 20% didn't actually understand how much they were being charged by their banks for access to their money overseas. 32% expressed a feeling that they did know how much they were being charged and thought they were unfair and not reasonable. And then we had another proportion, which was quite significant, who expressed that they were using the neo-challenger banks solely for spending money overseas. And I had a conversation recently where in conversation, it was expressed to me that most people are happy to use those banking apps. And the person that I was talking to had Monzo, for example, purely to spend money overseas, but would never dream of putting their salary into those new challenger banks. And that kind of feeds into the first trust element that we identified during that banking disruption index. And in the latest banking disruption index, we wanted to understand how consumers felt towards the use of AI to actually help advise and improve their financial wellness. And some of the results were quite fascinating, actually. We wanted to understand whether they used the new or the high street banks and how they felt around those different banks applying AI. Obviously, we found that traditional banks are slightly slower in adoption of technology, whereas the newer players find it a lot easier to bring that AI into place. We are seeing a lot of buzz in the market around artificial intelligence. I believe the term that's being coined at the moment is the AI spring, where a lot of organizations and individuals are looking to leverage the technology for their benefit. And we wanted to see how widespread that has become in terms of customers' experience with that. And again, following on from that sentiment, we wanted to understand the level of caution and the level of apprehension that customers have with their bank applying that and offering services that apply AI to that scenario. So it was interesting when we actually found out what those results were as to some of it was surprising, but some of it was unsurprising. Clearly, understanding and awareness played into that. And so if I pass to Simon to explain perhaps some of those results and how did we find those and whether they were, how they sort of married to our thinking.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's quite ironic. We've got people talking about AI Spring again. Anybody who's worked in AI and ML will have lived through lots of talk about different seasons, and we're in the endless summer in the UK right now. We've got the summer dragging on and dragging on. This quite strange golden autumn we're having right now. And it reminds me of the talk about AI Spring and AI Summer over the last 10 years, where we've repeatedly been back in the spring. And every time we're in the spring, it's because there's been a new piece of technology created, something exciting that stimulated even more interest. And we seem now to have a plethora of powerful techniques that we can bring to bear on different problems, and I think it is driving enormous optimism about the value we can get out of AI for finance. Now, what we are seeing, we have seen banks have used AI for a long time. But what we are seeing is that there's a lot of attention on what I would call non-optional use cases. So things like anti-money laundering, anti-fraud, behavior monitoring. We're seeing this in all our big customers. We're seeing it in smaller accounts as well. And this also bleeds through outside of banking into insurance in particular. What we're seeing here is that regulators are imposing this on the banks, and they can't do it without using AI and ML. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're also seeing adoption into some non-optional areas, I think facilitated by the realization of the technology that's happened, as I was talking about, this new tech. So in particular, customer service is something that's very interesting. For many years, people have wanted to use AI and have used AI in limited use cases for customer service. But now we're seeing a lot more potential to really realize the visions. I think we're still a long way off fully automated bots. I think this probably comes back to some of the things that we'll hear about from the survey in the next slide. But we are seeing really realized semi-automated functionality, which is delivering quite significant value points in some of our customers. So let's move on to the next slide. And perhaps this peels back the onion. Can we have the next slide? We can't have the next slide. Oh, we've got a poll. I haven't anticipated the poll.
A poll question now, which is, okay. Are you happy with AI being used by your bank? Yes or no? So if you could just put your answers into your answer up on the screen there by selecting yes or no, please. And we'll have a look. It was interesting, the age split there, I wonder.
Yeah.
The ages of our audience.
For everybody in the audience, it's very frustrating for panelists. We can't actually use the poll.
No, but we've got actually 63% are happy with AI being used by their bank and 37% are not. Based on your research, that sounds like we've got a younger audience, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not too far away from what we found in the survey, to be honest, and on some of the questions. We've got another question about parents here.
So do you think your parents would be happy with AI being used by their bank? Yes or no? I'll just leave that up for a second longer. And yeah, as sort of suspected, 64% don't think their parents would be happy with their bank using AI, and 36% say they would.
Yeah, and this reflects probably something of what we saw. We saw about 40% of people don't believe they really understand AI and ML, we saw about 30% saying that they didn't want the banks to use AI technology. Interestingly, that implies that a lot of people who don't understand it are quite happy for it to be used. We did see a majority of people being happy with the idea of AI being used to support them. But this was definitely weighted towards the younger demographic. And I think that it is very important about trust in banking. We did see that there is a lot of trust in retail bank brands. Some of the questions Richard was talking about, would you trust your bank to manage your finances during a recession? Clearly, when we put people under some caveats, they're a bit more concerned about trust in their banks. But in general, there is a lot of trust in retail banks in the UK, but less trust in AI and ML. And I think that this is something that was really important for me, which is that it's very important that we get out into the market and talk about what's happening with AI and ML in a transparent way to help consumers come to grips better, especially the older generation, with these applications, especially where we're in this adversarial race where criminals are using AI. And really, to protect people, I think it's very important that the banks use it, and it's kind of, as I say, non-optional. Could we go to the next slide? Yeah, so we will definitely anticipate a proliferation of technology across the sector. We're seeing bleed out into non-optional cases. I think we'll see a lot of use of AI and ML in the back office as it becomes much more routine. I think there are barriers to adoption. I think that people are going through the realization that there's still a requirement of a lot of process around AI and ML adoption, and that demos that appear to work and appear to give great results sometimes just don't translate into production applications. And we all know the trauma and pain of deploying a production application, which is as seemingly simple as expense claims management, but that can turn into a terrifying trail of tears as a software delivery project. So I think AI and ML projects have the same potential if they're not carefully and professionally managed. I think we do see a wider and more sophisticated appreciation of how value can be obtained from AI and ML. So building trust, building relationships, personalization, building the kind of applications that consumers want. Especially younger consumers, they don't want friction, they want frictionless interactions, and AI and ML can help with that. And of course, on the flip side of that, you want frictionless applications, but you also want trustworthy applications. And so we're seeing a lot of focus on trust and ethics developing. So as I've said, you would expect me to say this as an experienced practitioner. I do believe that homebrew applications of AI and ML are going to run into a lot of problems. I think scaling them, productionizing them, using them routinely becomes very problematic very fast. And I think that with the current generation of technology, there's a lot of stuff that appears to work but ends up not working in the limit. And while that seems fine at the time, it turns into a big problem later on. So our advice is to measure twice and cut once. And I would say that, definitely foundationally to any successful AI and ML project is having a solid, trusted, modern data platform in place. Because if you haven't, you're going to have to basically build it to support the project at hand. And whereas that's fine when you absolutely have to do it and the managing board is just telling you get it done, it's not fine when you're having to do things in a disciplined, routine enterprise manner. Okay, so I think probably we should go to the next slide, and I should hand back to my colleague Richard.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks for sharing that, Simon. it was really interesting to know how people feel about AI and about the trust. What are you going to focus your next banking disruption index on?
So the next banking disruption index is taking that to the next level, actually. So with trust in mind, we're looking to look at the area of security and how banks are applying security in the different areas that they're applying security. Fraud is obviously and money and protecting their customers against scams or against unauthorized access to their accounts, etc. So we're going to have that focus on security for the next banking disruption index, and it'll be interesting to understand how that marries actually to the research we've done on AI. And as Simon says, the whole area of AI is very exciting and very interesting. Trust is key. And in order to build trust, you have to ensure that your AI models have the guardrails in place. You need to make sure that it's not just focused on cost cutting, I think is primarily where we got to in our research, because customers that had a greater understanding were a lot more happier for AI to be applied to their day-to-day finances. So there is a journey to be had. We need to help banks to educate their customers around how AI works and how it benefits. We need to remove some of that anxiety around AI and how that works. And I think through education, we do lift that knowledge and understanding, and that anxiety and nervousness will drop away. I think banks need to focus, they need to have customer centricity, where they're focusing on how AI benefits the customer and not just focus on cost cutting and internal efficiencies, because customers always like to know that at the end of the day, again, going back to trust, if they need it, there's always a human available to them to help them. And I think that's key to a lot of the AI solutions and approaches that we're seeing banks trying to implement and adopt. And I think also that education is key to understanding AI. And as Simon mentioned, around ethical practices and principles to ensure that AI is there for the benefit of the customer and that models aren't inadvertently discriminating against individuals based upon algorithms and the way that these things have been taught. Because experience shows us that that's very easy for an AI to jump to a wrong conclusion unless it has those guardrails and understanding. And again, that's why it's key, I think, to have experienced practitioners who understand how not to start programming these models to make sure that you don't have that discrimination in place. And I think that when we start moving into the areas of security, it'll only highlight that understanding and trust and education requirement further.
Thank you, Richard and Simon. That was really fascinating. I think I think a lot of us are so reliant now on having AI in our banking. I don't think I would have been able to balance a checkbook by any means, because I'm so used to knowing when money's coming in and going out automatically. I'm just interested in what you say when you were talking about trust. So you said around definition, so you said that obviously, so Monzo is a neobank, but you said Revolut isn't classified as a bank. Is that correct?
Not currently in the UK jurisdiction. They have repeatedly applied for their banking license, and there've been some high-profile reasons as to why perhaps the PRA and the FCA have apprehension about allocating that. The reasons I don't think all the reasons I don't think are necessarily public, but Revolut do have banking licenses across Europe, for example, but in the UK they're yet to receive it. But I'm sure it's something that's only a matter of time, and it's why when we talk about Revolut, people often synonymously keep them within that neobank, challenger bank sort of pigeonhole kind of categorization.
It's very interesting as well when you talk about trust, because obviously people are happy to use those banks for overseas spending because you don't get charged all the fees, but they wouldn't. You say lots of customers wouldn't put their everyday salary in there and use it as their main bank. which is interesting because I don't think the mainstream banks have really proved themselves to be incredibly trustworthy or responsible over the past decade. So I'm interested that customers do trust their old bank with their salary, but not these neobanks. But we'll have to see how that continues to progress over future indexes.
And that's a good point, Charlotte. And I think when we were sort of having our discussions around the focus for the next BDI, we raised a lot of those points ourselves around what level of security or trust are the traditional banks actually putting in place that would allow them to compare to the neobanks, and why would there be less trust perhaps around a neobank than a more traditional bank, and to understand that consumer sentiment, and perhaps understand what more do the traditional banks need to do in order to become more agile, such that they are attractive in the same way as some people that are moving to the neo-challenger banks, and what do the neobanks have to do in order to prove themselves to be as secure or trustworthy as a traditional high street bank. So it'll be interesting to see the results that come out of that survey around security.
On that note, Chris David has asked, given the low level of trust in banks, traditional and neo, how can IT and AI and technology be used to increase trust?
I think there's a number of ways that AI can be used to increase trust. So, for example, we mentioned fraud detection and fraud prevention. So, if you have that AI application that is capturing fraudulent transactions or behaviors and patterns, if customers are made aware that it is actually an AI that has captured something, and the AI has captured it because it's detected this, I think the trust in AI will actually only increase amongst customers, and they will be happy for that to be extended to protect them further. I think there's often an apprehension as well when fraud is detected. It isn't just that on the bank as to, is the bank securely, is the bank secure, and is it detecting this, and is it applying technology? There's also how did this happen in the first place? And I think the banks are going to have to start doing more to actually do that analysis to understand how their customer was targeted. And I think AI will help in that sort of root cause analysis as well in the future. Simon, I don't know whether you have a view around.
I think it's a great take. I come from the other side, and I would say, when you talk about trusting people, what is it that makes you trust somebody? And I think it's that they're accessible, right? That you can go and talk to them, right? Because if they're off in a castle, you don't want to. You get nervous about them, right? You don't have any access to them. You build up a theory which is wrong about them. That they are open with you, and that they're honest with you, right, and transparent with you. And even when people have got tough messages to give you, if they're open, transparent, and honest, a trust can grow. Even if they're saying to you, you're not good enough, you need to do more work. At least you know what you're getting from them. And I think these are the things where actually AI and ML can help banks, because large banks are monolithic, gigantic institutions. When things go wrong or when you need to interact with them, it's often a bit like shouting at the ocean. It's not going to listen to you. It's just going to keep on doing its thing. Whereas I think that if you can use AI and ML to empower your customers, to let them get more information that they have a right to let them interact with the bank systems more fluidly and frictionlessly, then you can build a better trust, a better relationship with them. One of the things I think that people complain about interacting with large organizations is inexplicable decisions. They've turned me down. Why did they turn me down? Often we can't disclose why, because of the law, but sometimes it's random, capricious, administrative failures. And I think definitely cutting those out, using better automation, to take the workload away from people who are just overstressed, I think that can be somewhere where AI and ML can really help.
And do you think, Simon, that AI will then lend itself to more decision cases and more automation of banking processes like underwriting, decision making around mortgage lending, etc.?
It's very challenging because there are some very big barriers to using AI and ML in some of those processes, and it is always tempting to kind of trivialize other people's problems, or that when you see somebody really struggling to apply some automation in a business process, and immediately you think, well, it's just because they don't really understand what they're doing. But actually often it's because they really, really understand what they're doing, and it's really, really difficult. So I wouldn't minimize the challenges of applying AI into some of those processes. But I would say what I have observed when this has been done successfully is that what tends to happen is that the routine decision making gets automated, and what happens is that the humans end up having more time and bandwidth to focus on the corner cases and the discretionary tasks that drive quality. And that's something that I think we will see more of, that this will enable the aspirations for quality that chief operating officers have to be realized more affordably. And I think that's the way I would see automation going.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think along with that quality and automation comes speed and convenience. And I think speed and convenience, Charlotte, is again that actually helps to build the trust that we were talking about before. And I think as things become ever faster, ever more accessible, as Simon said, and ever more efficient, they will actually lead to a far better customer experience, far better customer wellness. And I think as a result, customers will be more embracing of the use and application of AI, and will actually be craving and demanding ever more, I think.
I think what we will see is competitive advantage come from using AI in the front end in particular, where people whose back-end processes are running over the processing window, from day to day, where things are going into asynchronous workflows and sitting for hours or days waiting for the team to get around to them. I think that those kind of process issues that bleed through into the front end experience will drive especially younger consumers away from banks. I think that this will become a key point of competition in retail banks in the future.
That's an interesting point, Simon. Sorry, Charlotte. That's an interesting point, and it might be something to pick up for a future topic. Charlotte, is can AI ever replace banks? Because it would be an interesting thing to see how AI in people's everyday lives could actually potentially negate the requirement for a bank. But it's an interesting topic.
I don't think so. I think we need banks. I think AI is not going to do that. That would be my take.
Yeah, and so we've got a few more questions here. So Clive Bullen has asked, going to the dark side, I guess now, what would happen if AI goes wrong and someone loses money via a bank's AI? How would it be found out quickly, and will they be compensated? And also, what are the worst case scenarios in terms of AI sort of malfunctioning or not working as it should?
So it depends where you draw. Yeah, it depends where you draw the line, what you call AI, right? So automated systems we have and have had for a long time in the banking, the financial services infrastructure. And there have been some extraordinary cases of high frequency trading systems going wrong. Look up Knight Capital, $640 million lost in half an hour. So, that wasn't AI as we would recognize it, but that's an automated system that went fritz through bad engineering practices. Now, in terms, what I would say in general is you can't delegate responsibility. There's a very famous IBM motto from the 1960s, saying that machines can't be made responsible because machines aren't accountable. And basically, the accountability rests with the institution. I think that the lessons and the problems we've seen from high-profile cases analogous to and orthogonal to AI and directly AI apply. So obviously the Post Office Horizon scheme, where there's been a tremendous long-running problem with compensation and people getting falsely accused in the UK. And I think recently, Utrecht in the Netherlands, and the way that they were using ML to decide housing subsidies, and the compensation and challenges that have happened there, really, really disturbing cases. And I think as a society, we're feeling our way through how to identify and remedy these things. I think it's fundamental to people running AI programs that they have strong governance in place. And one of the key things about governance processes is, how can we know if it's going wrong? When will we know? Can you tell me that it will be alerted a minute later, 30 seconds later, 10 seconds later? When will we know? How will we know? How will that be picked up and acted on? Who will do it? And how will we unwrap it later? The full 9 yards, just the same as if you had a fire in your office, right? You've got to understand, how will the alarm get raised? Who will do what when the alarm is raised? And what are we going to do afterwards when we've sorted everything out? And it's got to be the same for these systems.
Tim sort of related to that, Tim's mentioned that, there's a lot of exciting opportunities we've heard about today. But I guess, is it possible for these opportunities to be properly implemented without a strategic plan for how an organisation is going to manage its data?
I think, and Simon did mention this earlier, the founding principle is to have that understanding of your data and to have a strategy around your data architecture. And from that foundation, you can then start building upon it and leveraging it within your AI models and your application of AI. But data is key, to any sort of, not just AI, but any application within an organization, and the quality of that application in the organization. Quality data and organized data, and in fact, knowledge of that data. And one of the things we often find when we're talking to institutions is that they have vast quantities of data, and they don't necessarily know what that data is, nor do they know where that data is stored, but they are aware they must have it. So yeah, data is key. I don't know what you think, Simon. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's fundamental, but I would say that we've got to be sophisticated as well. I would always put sorting data out first, right? Because my view is that there's so much value in having access and high integrity for your data resources for just so many driving business reasons. I think you've got to be pragmatic though, because sometimes you'll have business requirements which you absolutely have to meet, and a 5-year data platform rebuild may mean that in 5 years' time you don't have an institution to come back to. So you've got to do something in the meantime. So we've got to be sophisticated about it. As I say, when you do that, you are going to incur a lot of costs because you're going to have to sort out the data in a pipeline. You're going to have a silo where you fix the data because otherwise you can't do anything. But that siloed approach won't be at the same level as an enterprise approach in terms of cost and strategic focus. I have seen people deploy lots of applications in that way. And there is a risk to it. There's a project risk. introduced because of that. But then you've got to balance it against your institutional risk. You know, if you can accept the extra cost, you can accept the extra project risk because the institutional risk outweighs it. Well, you've got to do it, and it's not going to be fun, but you've got to do it. So that's where I would take a view.
It's a really good takeaway there. Kevin has asked, he said AI is an example of automated decision making, but given that the ICO explicitly states that decisions affecting citizens must be subject to human intervention, what do you do from a process perspective if a customer challenges an outcome?
You have to have the decisions reviewable and amendable. You can't just impose your automated decisions on your staff or your customers. You have to have a route for appeal. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I've seen a number of different solutions, you know, and they are artificial intelligence, but where decisions have to have a human aspect to them. Most of those AI engines, models, they all produce human readable output that have traceability around the decision points and how the decision was reached, purely for that purpose. This isn't a, you know, in these cases, AI can't be a black box that's just fed all of its data inputs and is allowed to make a decision without being able to explain that decision.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, and peeling back the onion another layer, sometimes the algorithmic advantage is so great from the black box methods that you would choose to use them in the first instance. Mm-hmm. For instance, you know, detecting fraud, right? So I'll be honest, there are techniques for finding fraudulent activity which are black boxes. But when one of the black boxes starts saying this is fraudulent, that is the point when you do a human investigation. Right, and you know, the black box can be completely wrong. It's very difficult because you're then explaining why the notification is saying this is fraud, but it isn't. Right, but the risk that you are eliminating is so significant that I think you have to use that technique if it's available. And you know, again, it's about balancing what you can get from it and the problems that brings, you know, and making sure that you have those two things in balance pragmatically.
We do have a question here that says, do you worry that AI will ultimately take over? But I think, and it's evident from our discussion this morning, that you always will need some form of human oversight. So I don't think, am I right? We don't need to worry about that in the near future?
I think you are right. And I think, you know, if we look through technological advancements historically, the advent of computers in the first instance was essentially going to put people out of work. Actually, it generated whole new industries that brought more people into work. The advent of email, it was going to kill off postal services, or it was going to create the paper-free office. Actually, people, you know, there was a boom in sales of printers because people wanted to print out and keep a file of their emails that they were receiving. So a lot of these technological advances actually spawn off new industries, and the technology itself addresses more of the mundane activities of human life, and it allows us as humans to actually focus on the more challenging and exciting things. So I don't think it is something to be feared. I don't think it's going to put people out of job. It might change the jobs that people are doing, but I think it will actually create, Simon and I are gainfully employed in the industry, it will create a brand new industry or extend industries in a different direction. I don't know what you feel about that, Simon.
Yeah, I think we face big challenges as a society. Demographics and climate change are two enormous ones, and they're both unavoidable now. We're not going to avoid climate change. We're not going to avoid demographic disruption. I'm trying to avoid saying collapse, but disruption. You just have to look at the numbers. There are very imbalanced populations globally, and we're going to need tools that help us with those problems. I think that AI and ML can be used to create a great deal more productivity than they have so far, and I think that we're not at the end of the technological development of AI and ML. I personally, I see fundamental problems in terms of AI and ML being able to take over, but I see the risks much less in terms of takeover than in terms similar to an industrial accident, right? So I would warn against the possibility of AI and ML causing information pollution or disruption or destruction, much in the same way as I would warn against the possibility of a chemical plant causing water pollution or air pollution. And what I would say is people are not allowed to build chemical plants willy-nilly and then vent the outflows into the ocean. We need to have the same attitude with AI. We can't allow just random pollution and damage to be done with it. But I think that that's a more prosaic view, but I think it's something that is more important and is not being actioned, which I find quite alarming. Instead, people are focusing on the idea of things taking over and taking control. And I think it's much more like, what happens if a nuclear plant goes on fire? It's not taking control, but it might make Western Europe uninhabitable, right? What happens if a chemical plant suddenly releases a whole load of dioxin in an Indian city? Well, tens of thousands of people die, right? These are the things that we need to stop from happening. And it's not about, nuclear power plants don't take the reins of society. So I'm not worried about the reins of society being grabbed or AI taking control. I am worried about industrial accident type scenarios.
Thanks, Simon. We are over time, but I'm just going to sneak in one more question from Zoe, who's asked, for transaction monitoring systems, many rules are now AI-based or evidence-based, which means they've been trained on data and fraud cases we already know and are aware of. But how do we train the machine on something that we haven't, that we haven't seen yet? So a new form of fraud.
Okay, so that would be unsupervised learning. So that's looking for anomalies. I would say, frauds are thankfully extremely rare in comparison to normal transactions. At least obvious frauds, but the non-obvious frauds, I mean. But so you do have the rare event problem, and you are looking for something that's different rather than something that's something that you've seen before. Catching the frauds that you've seen before, I think, is relatively straightforward. It's the strange new ones that you need to be able to grab.
We haven't had time for all the questions today, so I do apologise, but I will be sending these on to Richard and Simon, so they may be kind enough to get back to you after this. And we've had lots of comments just saying that it was really excellent, interesting discussion. So thank you both very much for sharing your time and expertise with us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Charlotte.
And also thanks to our sponsors, including GFT. We wouldn't be able to do these webinars and keep them free of charge without you. And also thank you to our audience for asking such interesting questions and contributing to the discussion as always. Don't forget to check out the forthcoming events page on our website. We've got lots more coming up over the next few weeks. And have a great week, everyone. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you.